Well, hello, and welcome to yet another splendid episode of My Dog Will Eat My Face. It apparently has not yet happened, and as long as I have been on this trek, sometimes I wonder if it ever will. I really mean it. I was given maybe 2 months by my cardiologist when he first put me into hospice, approximately now 5 to 6 years ago. And I'm still here. But every certification period, as is required by Medicare to show that I'm worsening some, has basically indicated a continuous decline. Now, the caveat to that is I had one provider that said it plateaued and stopped, but then another provider, my most recent, said that's not true and decided to step in and take over my case. Thankfully, and on their first few reviews of recertification, absolutely they thought things have worsened. For someone who is the tear the band aid right off type, it is insufferable. I don't know why I'm laughing at that because it is insufferable. To put it in perspective, I have been trapped in my apartment, albeit a nice one, for the vast majority of those 5 to 6 years. We might be able to shave off the first year or two because I could still go a few places, maybe, but still, let's take it at the minimum possible. 4 years stuck in an apartment where I go months, sometimes years on end without seeing anybody except my own hospice team, which thankfully I have. And thankfully, I do have a dog that I love and adore, and he's imprinted himself upon me and loves me back and sees me as a parent. And that definitely brings some company throughout the days. But otherwise, being alone as I have been, that would be considered probably cruel and unusual punishment by any court in the United States. Inmates are put in solitary confinement as a punishment. Their only interaction is with the guards, and that might be for a couple months if it's severe. 4 years? I don't know. The closest that gets to that I can think of in the penal system is the Supermax in Florence, Colorado, where the Boston Marathon bombers, the brilliant Christmas Day shoe bomber Richard Reed, the all-time worst spy in U.S. history. What is his name? Is it Chris Hansen? Or am I crazy? Anyway, all that being whatever. What I'm dealing with here with this at least 4 year long stretch, although I know it's definitely long, is something comparable to being in and in any other place would probably be considered cruel and unusual. And also I ventured into this world, and through no fault of my own, I was born with a congenital defect that finally caught up to me. So, I know I've discussed it before within this podcast about the isolation that I suffer through. Well, I'm going to talk about it again because that is definitely worse at this point to me personally than the physical attributes, even though those are also proceeding to get worse and are just awful. They're literally embarrassing, which attributes to the isolation. I'll touch on that here. So this is now prolonged to such a point where I frankly don't even know how I could expect myself to remain. And yet, I hope I am Still, maybe I'm hallucinating this whole pod, but I doubt. And there's some surprising elements to the isolation that I don't think a lot of people think about if they have somebody in their life in hospice. And I wanted to touch on that too. I know I've not talked about that before, so I'm going to revisit that topic and just expand on it a bit more with what I have discovered through this very exhaustingly slow. And sure, there's much of anything that I can do about it. Maybe I'll have some epiphany of sorts, but I'll doubt. But we shall see. And as I continue on with this podcast, I have to warn my listeners that my wonderful dog, who I say will eat my face, but I actually really doubt he will. He's a sweetheart. Is actually curled up next to me. So you might be lucky enough to hear a dog interruption if he decides to go crazy and bark at something. You never know. So I'm just laying out that warning right now. There's a creature literally within, well, perfectly adjacent to me and a flush to me. So beware of something like that happening. Anyway, moving on though, as I've already said, it's been a long time enduring this isolation. But I feel it's been made worse through the variety of reasons that I'd like to explore. One is, as I already alluded to, the worsening physical condition. The fact of the matter is that my heart is so weak and it's not able to get the blood flow and the appropriate nutrients and hydration to all of my, and where that is most prominent is on the skin, your largest organ. I know I've said this before, but what's been occurring in the last few months, well, last month to 2 months maybe at most, I've been enduring things like red splotches that actually hurt on my skin, and it could be anywhere on my body. But when they're on my face, that's when it gets embarrassing. And also, I am disintegrating before my very eyes. If I rub my skin on my face, if I'm brushing my hair, and obviously, then have bristles touch the scalp, or if I scratch my leg, it doesn't really matter where. What comes down is a tirade of dead skin, which is then followed up with that red splotch because the dermal on the surface, the first layer of the skin, is dead and gone. So now it's irritated and bright red and painful. And the one thing I did not consider when this whole experience started, that is with these skin issues, is that it is downright embarrassing. It's not necessarily attractive to see people when you got red splotches on your face and it looks like you're coming down with bulbos of the plague. It's something you don't put in your I don't know, your dating app profile. Let's put it that way. Unless you got some freaks into that, but I'm not going to talk. So that just makes it worse because I get these red splotches on me and they're just downright embarrassing. So the instinct in me is to hide until it clears up. Like, I don't know, maybe when I was a teenager, I'd want to just hide all weekend if I got a zit and wait for it to go away and then go to school on Monday. Well, hopefully it's gone. Or that's the best I can equate it to. If it was still there Monday, unfortunately, yeah, I still went to school, and that sucks. But we've all been there. And I'm there again right now, but it's not acne at least. It's just my skin is dying. I am, as I said, falling apart, literally just melting before my eyes. And I apply hydrocortisone cream, use the appropriate shampoos. I do everything I can, but it is still a persistent issue. And then on top of this, I spoke of this very recently, is that I think I have been suffering from some narcissistic trauma from my last boss because she was a raging and terrible narcissist. She was just fundamentally a bad person. I'm sure she still is, and I hope she hears this. I've never said her name to the world, so I don't say it to cause a lawsuit or something. It's just a fact. So that's resulted in certain levels of agoraphobia. For example, right outside my building, I live in a very large apartment complex. It's just one building, okay? It's not a complex, I guess. It's one big building. And the first floor is all retail and restaurants. And pretty regularly, they close the street right outside my unit window and have farmers markets and street fairs and Oktoberfest and all these sorts of events, live music, where it used to be enjoyable for me to go down there, and even though I'm suffering from this, I would take my dog with me and check out a few things, at least visit the food trucks really quick and maybe get something good to eat because it's right outside my window. I mean, I could almost just reach for it. But lately, I've not done that at all. I've definitely developed a form of agoraphobia recently. And that also could be just from that long isolation. Now that's my safe space. That's now what I'm used to. So being in a big crowd or at an event makes me very anxious and nervous and self-conscious. So right there's two things now that are new that are making my isolation not better but worse. And I am going to add one more, a third one, because all good things come in threes, right? I'm going to add a third one that's made it worse. And it might sound like a bit of braggadocio, but it's honestly the sensible truth. And so my wording here, I'm going to try to be careful with it. But I might fail, and at the end you might think I'm just a schmuck. Anyway, the third worsening factor of the isolation is I've come to really realize in a very rude way from others that I am very much not like most people when it comes to my personality and to my knowledge set. When you are confined and your only sources of entertainment are books and documentaries and puppy play. I mean, there's a few other little things, but those are the big ones, right? Basically, I've spent years sitting on my butt learning things that are completely useless because my brain has always been that way. I've always been stimulated and enjoyed cognitive challenges. That's something I've truly always enjoyed. I love learning new pieces of information. And as an example here, I put together an elaborate connection between a 13th century Franciscan chant that was once said at funerals to a Francisco de Goya painting has part of the name of this chorus, basically the same name. And so I found that this de Goya painting, and I don't know if you've ever seen de Goya paintings, they are dark, man. You don't show them to your kids. I mean, they're just they're beautiful, but they're dark, and I don't know how else to describe it. They really push the human emotion to humanize with people that are going through some of the worst moments in life. That is sort of his one of his paintings, which was traditionally called, I believe, The Witches, was also, I believe, originally called Dies Irae, which is Latin, and it literally means essentially day of wrath. It would be something the monks would chant in the 13th at funerals. And I basically realized for the first time as these two things were related, sort of obscurely connected via this chant. The painting itself, done by his I lost my train of thought. Anyway, the painting, The Witch's Sabbath, is related to this 13th century chant, which is only four notes. Again, Dies Irae means day of wrath, and it's only four notes. And you hear them in our movies all the time. Now, I'm not a musician, so I can't tell you exactly what those four notes are. I could probably do it on a Google search, but I'm too lazy now to do that. It's only the four notes, and if you go ahead and pop in something into YouTube, basically the opening scene for The Shining, the theme song to the opening of The Shining is exactly what I'm talking about. It's just four notes that indicate impending doom. And that again is also what the deists were chanting essentially in the 13th century, saying this is about impending doom. Of course, the person died. And those two were really connected later on through a composer, a much later composer known as Berlioz. If I'm saying that wrong, I'm sorry. You can ask for a full refund of the podcast if I'm incorrect. But Hector Berlioz, within the Symphonie Fantastique, he had a whole section on that was titled The Witch's Sabbath, and the four notes prevalent throughout were these same notes. And so he was really the first one later on to really morph those two things together, more than just the 13th century monk chant. And I was so excited that I learned this obscure fact that these two things are things that are connected. And I already knew of the De Gaia painting. And so connecting it all with the music and the notes and the 13th century, I was just ecstatic. It all pieced together in my brain. And so I decided to share it with a few people. And do you know what they said to me? It's something I've heard quite a lot recently. It was, Joe, with all due respect, just shut up. That was from my friends. I know it kind of has an undertone of comedy to it, but when I've heard it recently, they were quite serious. I've also heard simply no one. So that leads me to final cause of this isolation getting worse, and that is this world, this pop culture is not well attuned to individuals simply with a vast set of what you might call antiquated knowledge of history, or geography, or language, and music, and art. High schoolers aren't like sitting around talking about it these days. That might shock you. But so too, 40-year-olds are not mostly talking about this. You could find the ones that can do it, sure, but they're far and few between. My point here is that just makes the isolation worse. One of the only things I can really contribute to the conversation is met with abrasive condemnation from my so-called friends. So, with those three components, this isolation has very much worsened lately. and is absolutely tearing away at my mental well being. So, yes, I worry about pointing out that third item because, as I said, it sounds like braggadocio. I don't mean it to say, oh gosh, I'm so smart and it's lonesome at the top. No. I just find things particularly interesting and have a mind for it that is very rare in our modern culture. And when you're so isolated within your own mind as I am, there's not a lot left to talk about. I can't be at the water cooler gossiping about colleagues or whatever. I don't really pay attention to the news, to be honest. I pop on it maybe once a day online and skim it, and I'm done. Or I might go to a couple sites just to get the gist of things, because no one source seems to give you a fair shake of what's going on. It's somewhere in between. So yeah, when I do say that third point, I assure you it's not me being a braggart of any sort. It is just a side effect of being by myself for the most part for so many. I mean, what else would I do? And these things have always interested me: history, geography, language, music, all that has always been my things that I really enjoy. So it stands to reason that that's what I read about and learn about as time goes on as I sit here in my apartment alone. And it's definitely brought on what I would say is depression. An old friend of mine called me out on this. I told him I have lost interest in doing all of my normal things that used to bring me joy. Or, more accurately, used to bring me happiness. And he flatly said, dude, that's called depression. And when he said that, it hit me like a wet herring across the face. Like Lordy wasn't using a sturgeon, right? But that hit me pretty hard. That epiphany, that realization was not what I wanted to hear, but it is what it is. So then I'm at this point. I've come to this point where I don't know what to do about it because it's only going to get worse. The physical parts are going to get worse. And that's the other thing where this isolation is becoming more negative. I live alone minus my dog. And that scares my hospice care providers so much I can't even verbalize it. The fact that I'm all alone and it could be days before they find out that I've fallen and can't get up or I died scares them just infinitely. Or if I fall and just can't get up, I can't get the proper help so I don't die. That last one is probably the real scary part because when you die, let's face it, everything kind of works itself out. You don't care anymore. But I do worry about my dog and what's going to happen to him. So I don't want him to starve to death or die of dehydration until I'm discovered. Obviously, I adore the little guy. So that has introduced an additional anxiety into the mix, especially as things worsen, as I've already kind of shared before. And that just increases the anxiety and the trepidation comes with this experience. And I think that might be one of the hardest parts of heart failure to deal with. And I'm not sure what the solution is because going back to my personality, I have, for as long as I can remember, been fiercely independent. I did not want to be given special treatment. I didn't want to appear like I had some sort of disability at all. I just wanted to have a normal life. And as things worsen, that's not going to be an option anymore. And I don't know how that will be handled. Because I gotta tell you, I hate living with people. I love dogs. I love my dog. I had no problems living with him. Other people, oh my god, they're the worst. They have mood swings and complications and baggage and ugh. I don't want to deal with that. So in my life, the only time I ever lived with anyone is when I was in a monogamous relationship with them. I've never, ever, ever had a roommate. Not only solution, whatever it might be, hard to comprehend. No matter what the solution is, in the best case is it will make me an adult. Now, it is hard to find any optimism as it relates to isolation. But I do know of one writer. He is actually one of my favorite writers, who's now deceased, who wrote an excellent summary of why he preferred isolation over company or being taken. So stay with me, and I'd just like to touch on that here in a moment. God, now I'm stuttering. In a moment. Now, I know I've somehow lost my microphone. Hopefully you guys heard me. I looked over and suddenly it was dangling way down. I have no clue what happened. Anyway, hopefully you heard all that. One of my favorite authors is Christopher Hitchens. And one of his last compositions that he wrote, he died in, 2009? So I don't know if this is from his last post-mortem publication or his last publication that he did himself. But I'll share that with you now. This is his, again, positive spin, which is so hard to find on isolation. Hitchens wrote, "Some people can't bear solitude, let alone the idea that the heavens are empty, and we do not even succeed in troubling their deafness with our bootless cry. To be an exile or outcast on a remote shore, many minds turn away and tear and seek any source of coziness. They can only say that not only when it is compared to the ghastliness of internal paternalism, the concept of loneliness and exile, and self sufficiency, I'm emphasizing, bucks me up. So it bucked him up. The idea of being an outcast and self-sufficient cheered him up. That's more or less has been my position. So my big fear is if I come to that point where I'm no longer self-efficient and still alive, because then I can no longer turn to the fact that I'm at least taking care of myself. Because a lot of people cannot do that. I'm sure you're aware. I can just start rambling off names in my head. I'm sure you can too, of people that could not handle self sufficiency. Or could not, let me correct that, could not be self sufficient itself. But as my condition worsens and worsens, I don't know how long I have to say that. In fact, I did not publish a podcast in the last week, which, by the way, I apologize for. But I didn't publish anything because I was in some pretty lousy straits, both physically and emotionally. mainly physically. I was dealing with a lot of issues with my condition. And again, that's only going to get worse. The only thing I can hope for is a merciful, quick demise at some point. So, frankly, I think that's something we all want. Who would want to go through a slow, agonizing death? So, at least I'm not there yet, but it is something that scares me. I don't want to end up in a position completely contradictory to my personality. It has been the same my whole life up to now. So, it might sound twisted, but I can only hope for a quick, rapid demise finally, and not continued worsening suffering until the very end, whenever and however which way it may come. So, my friends, that's where I'm at today. I apologize again for not issuing a podcast last week. And I'm going to apologize yet again now because I'm going to have to cut this particular podcast short. I believe I've said all what I wanted to say. I don't think there's an easy answer to this. It's going to come down to most likely best bad option I can muster. They're all bad ideas on how to get past this to me. So I've got to pick the best. Now I stole that line. I stole that from the movie Argo, starring Ben Affleck. It is a great movie. Again, it's called Argo. If you have not seen it, I recommend it. It's a good flick. Anyway, I am going to cut this week's podcast a little bit short because as I speak to you now, I am feeling physically worse and worse and worse. With every word, I'm feeling a mix of pain, hoarseness, and pretty bad nausea. So, for risk of this going downhill, of you hearing me vomiting all over my microphone, no, I would never do that. I hope. See what I mean? I'm getting worse with each voice, or with each word I state. So I've got to cut it short, friends. Don't forget, if you want to support the podcast, you can support it through its link on Spotify. You can subscribe to it through your favorite podcast venue. It's also become available very recently on YouTube, which is weird. There used to be Google Podcasts, and then Google decided, well, we're not going to be in the podcast business anymore. We're just going to move it all to YouTube. Now, my podcast is purely audio. It was designed that way from the get-go. But the only way to retain everything that's been sent to Google Podcast was to move it to YouTube. That was my only option. So, I'm now on YouTube, yay, but it just literally moved all my podcasts, like 168 of them or something absurd, to YouTube, and the only image you'll see is my stupid face. Because it was never designed to be coupled with video. So that's just how it is right now. And I am not going to go back and add visualizations to all those episodes. I wouldn't even, oh my God. I don't even know if I'm ever going to be honest. But hey, I'm there. I might occasionally upload some videos. I haven't decided yet. Maybe that's something I can entertain. It is a function on the new platform that I was forced onto. And now in hindsight, I think that's exactly why they forced that, is because that's now the new thing, is to have it not only an audio podcast, but something people can watch. But that seems a little odd to me. Whenever I've had a podcast on YouTube or watched one, it was on while I was doing something else, so it was just in the background hovering. I wasn't really paying much attention to watching people blab into a microphone. It's not that much more entertaining than my stupid single photograph. I don't know. I don't know yet what I'm going to do about that. If you have any ideas, send me them. Yeah, if you want to see something, or if you have any thoughts or ideas, as I said, let me know. I don't know yet how I'm going to handle that. But be that as it may, I'm now on Google. And another way you could support the podcast is obviously just go to patreon.com/my dog will eat my face. And there you'll get direct access to me. I do respond or try to. I have uploaded different photos of my life and any bit of recent life. But it gets you a little bit, and hopefully I can add more to that too as time goes on. But I've said it before a million times, and I'll say it again. Thank you dearly for the best thing that you can do, which is provide me with this voice and to listen. If you feel free to share it, do so. If you do that, well then, you're my best friend. But alas, that's really the only topic I had today. I don't know what. If I have any eureka moments in the future, I'll be sure to let my listeners know. And I'll hopefully keep in touch as things progress. But for now...